As 70s British comedies go, Secrets of a Door-to-Door Salesman is not nearly as good as Eskimo Nell, The Thief, or some of the better confession entries, but it's certainly better than crap like Ray and the Amorous Milkman. A provincial lobster fisherman decides to come to London for some reason and winds up in a boarding house full of luscious lovelies. One of them is an actress who gets him a job with her on a blue movie, where she proceeds to shake the holy hell out of him for the British version. And then they do the continental version. Another of the girls, Sally Cockburn, comes home to find him occupying her old room and bed. So even though they have never met, she proceeds to strip off and hop into bed with him. Felicity Devon-C, meanwhile, plays the youngest of the girls, a 17-year-old who would no doubt succeed in teasing him to death, constantly flouncing around seriously underdressed and begging him to make her a woman. If he weren't getting so much love released from her older housemate. There is also a repressed religious girl and a nice Jewish girl who gets him a job as a door-to-door salesman at the vacuum cleaner company where she works, which finally justifies the title. Of course, this also gives him an opportunity to have even more love with various randy housewives, and it gives the script a lot of opportunities to make bad jokes about love and romance. This whole time, though he has fallen in love with a French au pair who he first picks up on the highway, wrapped only in a towel after one of her romantic escapade has gone awry, and he tries to convince her to stay in England. This movie has the kind of fooled around and fell in love thing going, much more typical of Hollywood love comedies, where it ultimately tries to move from raunchy to romantic. And like most of its Hollywood ilk, it is not entirely successful. Still, we always enjoy Sue Longhurst and Felicity Devon-C, and Price and most of the other actors are pretty well. Amazingly, this movie was directed by Rilla, who years earlier had directed the British horror sci-fi classic Village of the Damned. Obviously, his career had seen better days, but this is not an entirely embracing effort, especially as far as this genre goes. We don't mind watching a good cheesy British love comedy of the 1970s. After all, this was the era when the genre flourished, and seen today, the confession films at all have a certain nostalgic charm about them. Sadly, Secret is the worst. A sprawling and brawling would be epic about the misadventure of a particularly unengaging character, played by the wooden Brandon Price. The crux of the film is about Price attempting to sell vacuum cleaners to various bored housewives. Occasionally he gets into bed with them in scenes that the following year's confession of a window cleaner would get perfect. But the direction and particularly the script of this film are nothing special, and much of the time the comedy is so labored and unremarkable that it just isn't enjoyable. Price is an unappealing hero, lacking the cheeky charm that made Robin Asquith such a favorite in his series of films. And the female talent is also underused. Although there is ample nudity, not much of it is titillating, and much of it just seems shoehorned into the plot to make a point. Director Rilla made the sci-fi classic Village of the Damned back in the day, but he must have fallen from grace to be stuck with this film. He displays little talent, and despite lots of exterior shot, you don't really get an enjoyable sense of British kitchen sink comedy. There is a cameo from Coronation Street star Johnny Brigg as a rival vacuum cleaner salesman, and some hard work from some of the appealing young actresses. But for the most part, these films are good, and it's easy to see why it's forgotten in favor of the more popular franchise flick. David Clyde is a lobster fisherman who one day is enjoying the company of his girlfriend when there is a yell from the floor below. David's father has fallen into the sea and is drowning. The girlfriend is ordered to call the Coast Guard, and David rushes out to the scene, but it is too late. However, he thinks this might be a blessing in disguise when he realizes he is free from the bond of the fisherman's life and can now strike out on his own. With his inheritance, the young man buys a car pack his bags and heads off to London. Yet another of the British craze for softcore movies in the form of comedies. This did at least have an interesting story behind it. As Secrets of a Door-to-Door Salesman was intended to have been directed by none other than Jonathan Demme, who was well into his exploitation movie phase at this stage in his career. Alas, a difference of opinion as to what direction the film should take meant he left the project soon after shooting began, and the only footage of his which survived is the first scene. It is noticeably not the work of the director who took over, Rilla, being far more American in appearance. If anything, the Demme introduction is far more enthusiastic about showing love and nudity than the rest of the film, and indeed the rest of its peers, where usually the camera was planted about 10 feet away from the actors as if embraced to lean in any closer. Of course, what this first 5 minutes is not is all that funny, and not simply because of the lame punchline regarding the drowning that follows. This is the fault of the lazy script, which makes it surprising it was written by Joseph McGrath and Dennis Norden, two reliable talent in the field of British humor. Even with Norden on board, there is nothing to rival the laugh of his outtakes, so it will be alright on the night, which is the same as Secrets could do with a dose of irreverence to brighten it up.